out within their communities as well. And then, people, educators and students, adult learners were experiencing intimidation. The practitioners were talking about tensions within and between groups. So even coming into classes because of some of the far right activity that was happening within communities. People spoke about the fact that this was often people who weren't from local communities, that there was agitators, I suppose, tapping into, maybe some of the fears or the issues that were happening in the communities, but using them to create conflict within communities, and that this was impacting on community education provision. So that I suppose was the first kind of big theme to emerge, that this was impacting on community education provision. And I have a few quotes there from both the focus group and from the focus groups and the survey. So some of the qualitative data came up. So somebody there said racism is alive and well in Ireland. I'm just moving my screen here, sorry, so I could read them myself. And they said it always has been from the time I moved here in 1998. The only difference between then and now is that the racism is overt. So that was a theme that came up a lot actually in the research, that this isn't something that's necessarily new, it's just that it's much more overt. And the next quote here says the same thing, that before we used to have to deal with an odd person making racist or homophobic comments. Now it's coming from people who weren't engaging in this before. It's as if seeing the stuff online or hearing it more is giving people permission to say it, or else it's creating anger in them that they didn't feel before. So this is what people in community groups are experiencing. And then in terms of actual maybe intimidation or threats, somebody posted that they had experience where colleagues were targeted, and they were targeted, and the groups that they were involved in, and particularly targeted online, and making memes and just intimidating colleagues online. So this was something that community education practitioners were experiencing, and it was, I suppose, something that they were having to face and deal with and respond to. So that was that theme, and it's all very quick and rushed, and I know there's a lot to process and unpack, but hopefully we'll be able to talk about it a little bit more in the breakout groups. But the next theme then that I found emerged was just around the complexity of the issue. So it's such a huge issue. It's not something that can be narrowed down to one particular activity or something that's happening in a community. It's so huge, and again, it's a symptom of much broader social and political issues. And we often think sometimes of the far right as being a revolt of the poor or the working class, and some of the images online and some of the, I suppose, the rhetoric online and within the media feeds into that idea. But if you scratch beneath the surface and look a little bit deeper, it's a lot more to do with people who have had power losing power, and that's the fear of losing that power. And often it's communities that have been marginalised are they're often very legitimate grievances are tapped into, and then people who don't have power are used as scapegoats as the cause of all their problems. So again, that whole issue and understanding that is quite complex, and I suppose for a lot of practitioners, even getting their head around all that can be quite a challenge, and where it's all coming from. It's bigger than community education, and again, while I'm focusing here on community education, I don't think there's anyone here that won't, or that these things that are coming up today that they won't resonate with them. I think that everybody working in education will experience a lot of these questions themselves, and it's much bigger than community education, or it's much bigger than academia. So it's, somebody said here that tackling it through community education is good, but won't address the root of the problem. So it's much bigger, and that's again across the board in all sectors of education, academia. One of the questions that came up a lot as well was just in terms of being responsive and ensuring that we don't feed the narrative. And somebody said, do we feed far right politics by making it central to our discourse? And again, that question of how to be responsive and how to ensure that we're not platforming racism within our work by trying to tackle it. So that's again, that I suppose it feeds into that question of the complexity of the issue as well. And then one of the big questions for community education was around the dismantling of the community and voluntary sector. So the community and voluntary sector after 2008 experienced huge and disproportionate cuts to the sector as a result of austerity, or austerity was being used as the reason. But a lot of the issues that would have been tackled within communities then, I suppose, because of the cost of the community voluntary sector, those issues maybe weren't left. I suppose the local communities who were dealing with those issues, they weren't being resourced and funded to deal with them. So it just created more of a feeding ground for agitators to come in and take advantage of that. So that, again, that's a much bigger question. And even somebody said about that their statutory organisation now has a corporate rather than a state service system. And again, I suppose that's a question that could, you know, be relevant across academia in general and all of the education systems. Another theme to come up was around fear. And again, apologies for rushing through all these, because I know there's an awful lot to unpack in each of them, and I wasn't sure how much I should focus on for this presentation. But again, maybe it's just to give an overview of all the themes that came up. So fear, community educators were experiencing fear in terms of speaking up against some of the issues that they were having in the community. Fears between or within and between communities. And fears of underrepresented practitioners. Now, a lot of the people who responded were white Irish, so they wouldn't have identified themselves as being among groups that would be a target of the far right. But for the people who did identify as being in groups, maybe underrepresented groups, they expressed their own fears. And somebody said there that at a personal level, it was triggering the hostile and fearful years that she'd lived through as a young lesbian in the 1980s. So this was coming back in her experience as well, something that she had to deal with again. Somebody else said adult students who were once happy to mix with students from other countries are now more suspicious of them and less likely to want to interact with them in class. And then somebody said that more and more people in the migrant community were sticking to themselves and not integrating with their communities for fear of something happening. So just the impact of that fear that it's having on local communities, and maybe creating more polarisation within communities, and fears for groups targeted by far right. So just a fear across the spectrum there between practitioners and communities and different more vulnerable groups as well. And then just watching the time here, just I think which is the fourth theme to emerge then was just around the capacity of community education to be responsive. And the sub themes that came up there was just around the skill set of educators, that people felt that navigating the tensions that were emerging in the communities required a really strong skill set, and often that wasn't maybe recognised or wasn't supported, because within community education, it's linked, I suppose, to the corporatization maybe of the sector, that a lot of the focus, the training, the continuous professional training development would be focused on new systems and HR systems, data collection systems, rather than looking at navigating maybe tensions within local communities, or even just social analysis training and reflective practice and things like that. The need for training and resources that's linked to that point as well. And then the importance of organisational values came up really strongly, that people who said that their organisations had very strong social justice, social inclusion values found it easier to be responsive, whereas if that wasn't the case, often practitioners felt quite isolated in those spaces. And the sense of isolation that some people felt within their organisation, but also as a kind of a community of practice. Some people felt that they were seen as the only people in their organisation who should be dealing with this kind of work, that, you know, other people felt that this isn't part of my remit as an educator. I'm here to teach a skill or a subject, whereas in community education, they felt it was very much integral to the work that they were doing, but often then maybe felt isolated because of that. Somebody said that they felt that their structures weren't flexible enough to give time or exploration on far-right tactics and ideologies, and just the importance of conversation. They reference there. Somebody else made the point that even though they had a lot of background in information or in anti-racism training and information, that they did one session with the class and it backfired so horrendously that it went the wrong way. They became more entrenched in a particular viewpoint, and this was in a focus group, and somebody said it was just, she felt very powerless in that space, because even though she had felt that she had the skill set to deal with this and the information and the capacity, that even within that space it just became very difficult. So again, the need for ongoing training and support around these things. I can't actually see my spot the screen there, so I'm going to just move the screen there. Yeah, and I mentioned about the isolation there as well. And just to finish, I suppose, on a positive note, and I use the theme of resources of hope, drawing on some of the work of Raymond Williams, who said that, and actually I have to try and think of the quote off the top of my head, but Raymond Williams talks about making hope practical rather than despair convincing. So I think even though we're, I suppose, trying to navigate a very depressing landscape at the moment, there's a huge amount of hope, and there was a lot of, I suppose, really good work happening on the ground that's really important to share, and often it happens under the radar. So one of the resources of hope would be value-led practice, so ensuring that practice is very much led by values. And somebody said that as an organisation we strive to practice what we model and operate from that ethos. So instead of challenging one narrative, they spoke about operating another. People spoke about the importance of outreach, engaging with communities. And again, I think that that's relevant, whether it's in community education or whether it's third level, tertiary education sector. And those relationships as well between tertiary education and community education and community development are really important. Also the importance of the arts, democratic engagement, the importance of embedding critical thinking in work. And there were loads of examples from all of these within the research. And then the importance of diversity. People were talking about groups becoming a little bit more polarized, and also this idea of having to have target groups. People spoke about the fact that before groups were a lot more diverse and engaged, whereas, you know, this idea of having target groups maybe isolated or polarized groups a little bit more. And one quote that somebody shared here was, I've heard it, I would regard as bigoted and discriminatory opinions expressed by a handful of individuals, but in most cases they're countered or challenged by other learners. So again, I think that you know, the resource within the room, within community groups, within the student population, within the body, it's sometimes educators feel this responsibility or this pressure to try and manage the tensions that are emerging within the group. They feel they have to be able to be responsive. They have to know all the information. They have to have all the counter arguments. Whereas often the case is that the knowledge is there within the room, and it's that facilitative process that was really important. And the last, I hope I'm not gone over time, Priyanka.
I think we just have about last 30 seconds, but it's fine. I think we need the concluding part, definitely.
Perfect. So I just thought I'd finish on this quote. And again, it was just building on the point about the importance of the arts. And somebody spoke about an organisation that they work for. They put on a play in Dublin City, and it focused, the play was, actually I won't give the name of the play, but it focused on the things that bind us. The group included a young man from Eritrea and a young woman from Ukraine. On the way to the theatre, we walked past a far-right demonstration with approximately 150 attendees. The community drama about solidarity stood in opposition to far-right misinformation that night. The play was written, directed and performed by the group. And I think that kind of sums up the importance of community, the importance of solidarity, the importance of the art, and just the importance of that connection with the topic as well, and with what's happening within society as well. So that's it. And I know there's a lot in there, probably a lot to process, but thanks for the space and the time to be able to share some of that. Thanks, Priyanka.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. That was just a whirlwind tour of so many different points that we could just have different sessions on entirely. And I think that's definitely given us a lot of things to think about in terms of practitioners' experience and the fact that racism is not is overt now, but at the same time there's also like pinholes of hope. I think that brings us perfectly to the talk by Dr. Lillian Nwanzi-Akobo on her lived experience on how far-right ideologies have infiltrated higher education spaces from her capacity as the director of the Higher Diploma in Further Education program at Maynooth. Dr. Lillian, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I just want to start by thanking everyone who invited me for this, the organizers of the program, as well as Suzanne for the incredible work she's doing in community education and in that space. In the next 10 or so minutes, I will speak honestly and from my heart about my own experience as a Black educator, as well as the director of an initial teacher education program here in Ireland. And I will split, very similar to what Suzanne has done, I will split my presentation into three. I will speak first broadly and generally about my experience in the classroom and in other learning spaces. I will speak about supports that I have encountered, and then I will end by offering some hope in this very bleak terrain. One of the first theories of teaching and learning I encountered as a trainee teacher was critical pedagogy. And very early on in my journey, I learned that the thrust of critical pedagogy is that the classroom is a microcosm of society, and that the systems, the structures, the pulse, the energy of the society will, in some shape or form, infiltrate the classroom. Now, I learned that theoretically initially, but today I live it. When I first started teaching, I encountered constant resistance to my pressing, to my ideas. Now, this resistance was often very subtle. Students will undermine me. They will ask questions I had already responded to two white members of staff. They will pass snide comments and remarks, often not very loud enough for me to be sure that what I heard was derogatory, you know, those kinds of things. Now, I named this to my colleagues at the time, but even I couldn't talk really strongly because some of the things were very subtle, and you will often ask yourself, is this just my mind? About 2 years ago, however, the resistance became more brazen in the learning space. Students became more vocal about their ideas about me and people like me. One student announced to the hearing of the whole class once, right in the middle of his session, "No one cares about your anti-racism bull XYZ. I'm sorry, I can't swear. If you are unhappy with the way Ireland is, just go." Others were not so brazen, but they would include their thoughts in the essays they knew I would correct. Now, I noticed that the aggression moved from subtle to very strong. And once I had to announce that I was ending a class early because I no longer felt safe in it. Shortly after I began to voice these observations about how brazen things had become, there was then the eruption in Dublin in November 2023. You see, the aggression in my classroom was not unconnected, or the aggressions I was experiencing were not unconnected to the aggressions that were happening in the wider society. Now, let me state clearly that things didn't just suddenly change, and I think Suzanne mentioned this in her presentation. They had always been there, and we have always spoken about the disrespect, the microaggressions, which I would love to call macroaggressions because there's a cumulative effect, the hate and the undermining that we as minoritized educators face. I spoke continuously in the last 2 years about the undercurrent of aggression and anti-migrant rhetoric I had continued to face in the classes I was teaching. Today, it has only become more brazen, and maybe, thankfully so, maybe now we would be taken seriously. Maybe now the dangers that we have been shouting and writing and speaking about are becoming more obvious to everyone, and maybe now there will be some concrete action, maybe. When we speak about the far right, we speak about extremism. We speak about an almost irrational political positioning. I'm pleading that we refocus. The student who continually refers to the country of Africa and shows me what they think is a really lovely map of Africa filled with monkeys and lions and zebras may resist being called far right, but has internalized an image of Africa that perpetuates their seeing me as less than, no matter how well-meaning they are. The student who insinuates in a presentation that I am examining that all migrants from Nigeria to Ireland are people seeking asylum and invariably dangerous to their communities has not just committed a slip in speech, but is speaking from a particular place of white privileged ignorance that feeds into their behaviors in class, in the society, but also in their interaction with me as their Black educators. When colleagues and students send emails about things within my remit only to the white man on my team and refuse to copy me in, even after being reminded that they should, they may not position as far right, but their actions betray the internalization of white superiority and the rhetorics that come with it. And these things have a lasting impact on the individual, almost as lasting as the impact that the comments of far-right actors on Twitter would have. My plea is that we stop looking only to extremes and begin to look at and truly notice the impact of these continuous but daily manifestations of a much deeper issue. That we begin to truly interrogate ourselves and really question our own biases, our beliefs, our initial reactions to difference and to thoughts. I will now transition to speaking about support. Remember, I said I'm going to talk about 3 things, so I'm moving really quickly. I work with a small team of amazing people, so it's not all bad news. I have an incredibly supportive team, a team of people who are responsive to the things that I face and the things that I speak about. And one question I'm usually asked by members of my team is, what can we do to support you? Most times my response is, I don't know. And that is the truth. The myriad ways in which I'm inundated with these macroaggressions and obvious racial discrimination makes it difficult to articulate eloquently how anyone can help me. Some people point to policy as an answer to what we go through. It is one thing to pass nice-sounding policies, but how do these policies really protect me from the constant disrespect and invisibilization that I experience as I navigate academia? And I'm not sure there is such a word as invisibilization. If there isn't, what I mean by it is the constant rendering of me as invisible by constantly omitting my names from emails, minutes of meetings, or just downright not acknowledging my presence, even when I'm standing in your face wearing bright colors. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but what I will do is tell you of some of the things that have helped. My colleagues, and especially the co-director of the higher diploma program that I work on, actually timetable spaces for us to have critical conversations about the things that I encounter. In those spaces, I'm able to speak about my experiences, but as a team, we are also able to reflect on why I am experiencing what I am experiencing. I have found this to not just be therapeutic, but also very developmental, not just for me as an educator, but for the program that we lead on. Our reflections from these conversations have shaped how we design our timetable, what is included in our developmental plans, and our approach generally to teaching and learning. On an emotional level, this created space makes me feel seen and heard. It makes me feel valued by my peers. And as minute as this sounds, this has kept me going. One thing I do wish to highlight for people who might want to replicate this space is the ethos of humility that forms the basis of our coming together. We don't come there to do anything about our egos. We're able to call each other out. My colleague is able to call me out. I'm able to call him out when I see that he's unreflecting about his white privilege. He's able to do the same with me and point out to me that even as a Black person, I too may have internalized some of these racist thoughts. If there are white colleagues who are here on this call who work with minoritized ethnic teachers, please consider replicating this structure in your own space and see how it works. Still on the issues of support, Stephen Brookfield speaks about hiring minoritized academics in clusters. The week I was hired in my department, another minoritized ethnic woman was also hired. I share an office with this woman, and it is pure therapy when we sit to talk and sometimes laugh about the ridiculous microaggressions that we experience. Hiring minoritized teachers in clusters may not always be a solution, as there is not a single homogeneous experience that we face as minoritized academics, but it certainly could help. Spaces and webinars like this, if followed through, can be spaces of support. In the last 20 or so months, I have attended and participated in over 20 of such webinars. And at the end of most of them, I found that I was emotionally drained, I was angry, and I often asked myself, what was the point of this? I rehearsed things that had deeply wounded me and poured from my heart only for things to remain the same. I'm hopeful that this will be different. I attended a few days ago a critical discussion space with people from the traveling community, and the facilitator ensured that we did not leave the space without thinking of and coming up with concrete steps that we all could bring into our own spaces. I'm hopeful that between the things Suzanne has shared, those that I'm sharing, and I'm sure the amazing conversations that we will have in the breakout rooms, we all will be able to highlight at least one concrete step that we could take into our own little spheres of influence to combat this rise in racist rhetoric in our learning spaces in Ireland. And I'll go now to the last section because I can see Priyanka is itching to tell me to round up. One of the criticisms I face when I bring anti-racism into the learning space, whether through theory, through pedagogy, or through storytelling, is the absolute bleakness of the situation. It feels like a hopeless situation. And hope deferred, a wise writer once wrote, makes the heart sick. I want to conclude my portion of this presentation by bringing some hope. This hope I will share in the form of a story. A few weeks ago, I was brought in to facilitate a class. It was an impromptu session, and I was covering this session for a colleague and a friend of mine. There were about 9 people in that class. 6 of these 9 I had taught previously in a module that dealt with some of the issues that we are speaking about today. I came into this new class, and once again, I was hit with a barrage of racist comments and assertions by some of the students. 6 of the 9 students that had attended the previous module challenged their colleagues gently but firmly, pointing out to them the errors and the absurdity in the stance that they took. It struck me that the critical education I had given these people almost a year back had worked. When I was teaching those 6 a year earlier, it felt as though I wasn't making any progress. They were resistant. It was very uncomfortable. Sometimes they were just downright hostile. I met them a year later, and there was a big change. Critical education can work. The issues in Ireland are a bit nuanced, and so critical anti-racist education in Ireland must be bespoke to our community. Gently facilitating people to look inward and to rethink things that they have been socialized to think all their lives is a skill that not everyone has, but that everyone, especially educators, can cultivate. 6 may look like a small number, but imagine if all of us on this call who are educators can make our classrooms the kind of spaces where people are facilitated to think about their own inner biases and inclinations. I want to end by asking that rather than start by looking outwards, we begin by looking inwards. All of us, Black, white, minoritized, or dominant ethnic, look inwards and begin to grapple with the faulty things we all have been socialized into believing. It is then and only then that we can look outwards and begin to deal with this. Thank you all so much for listening, and bye.
I have the really difficult task of continuing this when I've just been rendered absolutely speechless, Lillian, with your brilliant way of speaking and weaving in truths and also experiences together. And I think combining everything that Suzanne shared from her really interesting research and what Lillian have now shared, I think it just opens a door for so many things for us to think about. So what we're going to do now is I think that we have learned so much. We're going to get into 2 breakout rooms. Actually, there are 4, but then we have, because of the big number, we have 2 main questions that we're going to ask and discuss. One is, what are your reflections on what you have heard so far? And the other is, has the rise of the far right impacted on your practice in education and academia? And who knows, maybe once we come back into the main room, as Lillian has said, think of some concrete steps that we can actually come up with in our own sphere of influence. So I'm going to start putting everyone in breakout rooms, and please bear with me because it's going to be a bit interesting how I do this. And there are participants. I think I'm just going to start assigning everyone one by one to different places. I suppose everyone is back. Yeah, it's good to see everyone on screen again. Absolute apologies for this, technological snafu. I'm just better at dealing with human rights issues than dealing with Zoom. 4 years into the pandemic, and I still haven't learned certain things. And I'm not going to apologize too much for some skills that I know better than the others. But thanks so much for everyone for being patient with the Zoom live. I think it'll be, I know that was a very short time. Just wondering if we would like to go in a circle with the groups, with having the group named Reflection 1. If someone from the group wants to share what were you able to just discuss a bit, perhaps?
I didn't notice our group numbers. Do you have maybe names or anything like that? Or
That's right. I have them. So in the group one, reflections one, there was Pepe, Catherine, Lonsdale, Camilla, Veronica, Kathy, and Katrina.
Go for it, Kathy.
Yeah, we had a really nice discussion group. One of the attendees is all the way from the United States. But yeah, really acknowledging the experiences of Lillian and really honing in on the fact that we're not necessarily the island of 1,000 welcomes that we'd like to think we are, and that really the whole place would collapse without the neighbors and the co-workers and the friends that that we have through immigration to Ireland. And of course, Pepe, if you'd like to share as well, as a student and an immigrant, just dealing with the those microaggressions, calling them out being a really important approach, not standing by. I think it's something that we have done in the past and continue to do in relation to the traveling community in Ireland. And this is again another example of where we really need to actually acknowledge and then call it out and do something to really make a difference for society and for our fellow residents in Ireland, Ireland for all.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Anyone else from the group wants to add more? Perhaps you mentioned Pepe. Hi, Pepe. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the detail that was already mentioned by Linian, I believe, of not only focusing on the extremes, but understanding that racism, xenophobia operates in many different levels, and it's about what we're normalizing, both as students but also as educators. So something not to forget when discussing these things, not only about what you see in the iceberg, but what is underneath, that is maybe more apparent to some of us than others.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's really helpful to know, to just really discuss that in terms of those reflections. Moving on to the next group, the reflections group that put together was Judith Evers, Anne David, Kiera Walsh, and Sandra Ryan. And I'm sure there were others, but they may have left the meeting by now.
Yeah, we just kind of were praising just the fact that this topic has been brought to the forefront, and Sandra had some very interesting insights from her experience of educating primary school teachers in Mary I College, and saying how they provide kind of introductory lectures on racism and on kind of attitudes towards travellers as well in the classroom. So we thought that was very interesting. But I don't know if Sandra would want to speak to that herself.
Sandra, are you here? Do you want to share a bit more? Okay. I see that her camera is turned off and she's on mute too, so I'm assuming she's busy. Well, thanks so much, Kira. That's definitely helpful too and adds to the first group's conversation. The second question for the other two groups were in terms of impact, in what way, if it has, the far right impacted on your practice in education and in academia. So in that group, we had Lisa, Daira, Philomena, Tanya, Colette, and Mary Maher. Would someone from the group like to share what may have been discussed? And of course, Lillian was in and out, I believe, too.
we didn't get the questions there, and I don't work specifically in education. I'm just in this network. But I can share just a little bit of something that we've seen across. I work voluntary with a lot of LGBT groups, and we've seen a mass exodus from Twitter, which I think probably lots of minority groups have had to do, leaving the platform X, because it's just not a safe space online for those groups anymore. Just to echo from the other questions, I think we were all really blown away by Lillian and told her that when she joined our group, and that idea of, I think we all exist in such bubbles. So even if we are in minority communities or we are suffering in certain ways ourselves, we so often can miss what's happening with others. So I think an important action that we took from that was the importance of listening to as many diverse voices as we can, whether that's ensuring that even our inner circles, you know, include people from different backgrounds, or if we're organizing panel discussions, podcasts, whatever, that we have different voices constantly and regularly, because there's so many nuances, there's so much change. And I think being really conscious that what one group might experience could be totally different to another. And I think we were all, dare to say, really shocked by what Lillian said. Maybe that's naive, but we didn't realize things were that bad, and that, you know, the university can't intervene. Perhaps they will, or whatever, but to such blatant racism like that. So sorry, I'm sort of half answering the question and half just giving some comments from our group.
No, I think that's really helpful to know. I think as someone who has been minoritized, and that is something I never thought, and I'm guessing that would be the experience of Lillian perhaps too, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's only when you come to a different country you realize that you are a minority and you have a certain skin color, you know, that's not the majority. But it's also the very fact that all of us here perhaps are people who are interested in the subject, are attending, and not those who are doing some other kind of research, yeah, because they're like, well, this is not my research area. So that just says a lot. But also it's like, where are the spaces where we can talk about it, because these are microaggressions. So thanks so much for sharing that, Julissa. And I think some more bits from the last group on that had John, Michelin, Suzanne, Pamela, and Bridget. Would anyone like to share?
Hi, seeing as everybody else has been quiet. Ours is kind of a small group, so there was Suzanne, myself, and Pamela. So I live in Kerry. Interestingly, Pamela and I had two totally different experiences. So I'm literally going to say two sentences and let Pamela give hers. So I suppose I would notice a huge change. I'm in a south of Ireland, small enough town, Tralee, but I cover the county. So I would see a huge rise in racist language, behaviour, and people being openly comfortable with conversations with my work colleagues. I am an educator, so I mostly work with community groups and tutors, but it's actually with my work colleagues. So they probably are a little bit more careful. Not probably, they're far more careful with me. It's just I'm hearing stuff elsewhere. So organisations, large organisation, very busy. I have been trying to get the need for training. And actually, when I started the organisation 21 years ago, I brought the first training in under no racism. I was young and innocent and naive, and it actually worked really, really well. But I can see that we actually need to do it in our own administration, in our own home, in our own venue first, because it's just getting a little bit beyond control now, I would feel. But the community groups are great at kind of educating one another. They are definitely people who are coming in now with with very blatant racist sentences. So a lot of the times that learning environment tackles it itself. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Groups shift and decide if they want people in their groups or not. I'm quite clear at being able to clarify criteria for entry into community education and the role. But it is a difficult space to be in, and I definitely don't feel I have enough in-depth, absolute proper skills or education at the moment. I feel like I could live with Lillian and other trainers for the next 6 months. I think we need to up our skills, up our awareness, and also to give people like me the confidence to be able to tackle it at both an education level but also at a colleague level.
Yeah, thanks so much, Micheline. Pamela is back in a public space, so she cannot speak. I just want to quickly say that we're at the hours mark. So if anyone needs to leave, I completely understand. But if anyone wants to stay along, we definitely are going to stay around for a bit longer too. So very quickly, thanks so much to everyone who's come in and attended, and we hope we keep the conversations going. But to just quickly respond to what Micheline was saying, I think there's a sense of, I remember when I had to move out of my house here in Dublin in early 2020 and I was literally told that find a house before Ukrainians come in because they will be seen as one of ours in Irish terms, and I would always be seen as an outsider. And this was someone in the education setting. So I suppose it's also where we talk about higher education systems where we expect people to be more open-minded and to not have all this. It doesn't seem to be so because there are implicit biases that just come out in very interesting ways. So yeah, I think the floor is open now for anyone who'd like to speak and share. We're officially done, but then unofficially there's like so many conversations to go on. So this space is all for us to discuss. But very quickly, thanks so much again, Lillian, for sharing your experiences again, and to Suzanne too. We'll be organizing more events too. But yeah, let's just hear and continue this conversation here as we still have this going on. We just only about got started.
I see Camilla has her hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, just a really quick comment on Suzanne's research and how important and timely it is in terms of giving community educators the confidence to do something about situations like what Michelle has described. Because I think the default at the moment is to maybe participate in microaggressions because you're not aware of them, or to do nothing and thinking that that is the appropriate way. And it's very difficult sometimes to be the voice of change. But I think Suzanne's research is really practical and really important in equipping adult educators in ways to do that and in validating people's experiences as well.
Absolutely. Suzanne, please finish your PhD soon and air out all the research findings. And
I couldn't do it without the support of my brilliant supervisor, Camilla, and thank you for that.
That's great.
Don't tell people I'm your supervisor.
No, I mean,
I suppose I just had a very broad question and reflection for everyone, is that for those of you who are native Irish and have lived here and identify as native Irish and white, if people who are minoritized, people like Lillian and myself and others, have they ever felt that they have come and shared with you about instances of microaggression which do not fit into a box of it's neither bullying, neither racist comment, because a lot of it is just so murky, right? They cannot be fit into a certain box of what discrimination is, I suppose. So it's like if anyone's come up and like spoken to you that this is what I shared because, or this is what I experienced by someone else who said that. Is that something that you also hear from your colleagues, perhaps?
I lived in the United States and worked in higher education. I still do remotely for over 20 years, but a colleague, a friend of mine moved back to Ireland before I did, and moved back with her African-American husband, and he had a really hard time living in Dublin, coming from San Francisco. He was born and raised there, and it's got its own issues, but the overt and targeted racism that he was subjected to was a huge eye-opener for both of them. And that was probably 10 years ago. And I've only been back in Ireland about 7 or 8 years. And in that time, you can really see in the more recent few years, just how kind of overt, you see it in the States as well, the emboldenedness, because, people in power or people with a platform online are making it very vocalized, and that definitely emboldens more folks to be very overt about their own feelings and their own hatred, which is a huge concern. But that's one particular personal experience that I can share.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kathy. Really appreciate that. Yeah, that just shares so much. There's so many levels of how people express and share their or reveal, what they're feeling. We see a hand raised by Philomena Obasi. Please go on.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. And I want to say a very big thank you to all the speakers. And I'm so happy that this is being recorded. Maybe you will send it to us, because I was here from 12 to 12:30. I jumped into a meeting with my boss and came back by 12:55 again. I listened to some before I went out. And I think most of the things Lillian was saying resonate so much with me, where you've been in the class and some people will just stand up and walk out as you're coming in, and writing and telling you all they knew about you was help the little babies, somebody bringing some things to the church in those days in Ireland, and a penny for the little African babies. But now, one of those African babies standing in front of them to teach, what possible things could they know to teach, So all those things, we feel them, but we have to unpack. You have to unpack a lot of things before you go into a space like that, so you can be able to, do what you're supposed to do, wear your academic hat, and go in there and just do what you have to do. Because if we have to take all those things with us, it's so painful, it's so heavy, and it's not easy, but at least we are coming through, and I'm so happy we're starting a new conversation on it now. And we're going to start changing in the narratives with all this research. So I'm so happy to be here. Well done. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Philomena, for going back and forth, and still joining in here. Thank you. I think Suzanne wanted to share something from her research that got a bit left behind because of the paucity of time to elaborate on certain things or based on the conversation that came up in the group chat.
Yeah, I mean, I could be here all day, so what to focus on, and I mean, that's an indictment of what's happening. In a way, it's not a good thing, but just in terms of the chat as well, and it was just something that came up that was going back to one of the points that came up in the research and that Lillian kind of spoke to as well, was just about the importance of the organizational ethos, and that impacts then on the practice within the organization, and that where you have an ethos of inclusion, of critical thinking, of, I suppose, humility as well. Lillian spoke about humility and the importance of humility, that is very helpful for staff. And most people struggle even in everyday conversations. I know I have conversations even with friends and family, and I'm kind of taken aback, and I feel sometimes I think, oh yeah, I should be equipped to deal with these conversations, and then I'm completely stumped. And I go away, and somebody in the research as well, in the survey, said, I stayed up all night thinking about all the perfect responses and all the perfect things I should have said in that situation. And I think there's just something about, unpacking that a little bit, and how it's okay to kind of just stop things and say, I need to think about this, and go away, or just have faith in the other people in the room, or, that pressure that we all feel. I think if we're in this space, if we're in this room, you kind of want to change things, and if we're having this conversation, but sometimes the pressure that people feel to be the ones responsible for changing everything, whereas, maybe kind of stepping back and going, right, that there's a lot of resources there, there's other knowledge. We don't have to try and fix everything, because that can be counterproductive anyway. So I think and that ties in with Lillian's point about things can happen, but you mightn't necessarily see them straight away. Lillian saw it because she was able to meet with a number of people from that group again. So a year later, that you can see that change as well. So I suppose that's just trying to maybe be a little bit hopeful in a difficult time as well. So I'm not sure if that's what you were asking me to share, Priyanka, but that was just kind of some of what came up in the group.
Yeah, thanks. Lillian, did you want to share some more too?
Actually, no, but since you have mentioned my name, I'll just follow on from what Suzanne said. I do think that education can help, but I have been involved in anti-racism education that will not help. So I think more about it's how we do the education that matters. First of all, we have to find ways to embed it. Every time we bring in anti-racism education so we're going to have one class on anti-racism, you reinforce the issues that we're trying to deal with. And there are ways to embed from start to finish of whatever program. I think Suzanne spoke about an ethos. When you embody these things and you begin to live them, they will feed into everything that you're doing, so much so that creating one class or 1 week for anti-racism content would become ridiculous, really, when you start to see it. So I think we really need to put in a lot of thought. I don't have all the answers, but I think there's a lot of thought we need to put into how we do these things. And because there are so many different intersecting identities, for instance, and there's so many, the traveling community, I was, like I said, when I was speaking, I was in a program with the traveling community, horror stories, absolutely horror stories that they were sharing. There are many minoritized groups that have these kinds of stories. I do believe that if we sit down and really think about things, we can embody a system of being or a way of being or a way of teaching or a curriculum that can actually embody these things from start to finish. And I know I keep going back to starting from self, but I think it is really important, because if we all want to be honest, even those of us from minoritized groups, there are things that we have internalized that we need to unlearn. And until you start from yourself, you won't achieve much. You need to start seeing it from yourself. Examine the discomfort you feel so that you can be a bit sympathetic when you are bringing other people through that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really so helpful, Lillian. I think the other thing that a lot of minoritized people face is they're expected to keep educating others. It's like, can you write a report on all the things that you face? And in the beginning, I used to do that thinking, oh, this is going to help. And now I'm like, I told you what I told you. Now do your own research and figure it out, because it's exhausting. It takes me away from the constructive work that I have to do. And then people are like, well, there was no report that came in from the person, so we're not going to do it. But it's like, weren't you listening? So I guess it's all of that. I see that there are a lot of efforts institutionally on anti-bullying, on anti-discrimination, but as Lillian was saying about the microaggressions that become the macro, it's exhausting if that's the only reports that I need to be working on rather than focusing on doing the work. And then at the same time, there are people who would also behave differently with different minoritized ethnic groups. So it's not always a uniform thing, and that's not got to do with productivity or anything, but it's just a different way of behaving with others. So yeah, I think it's just about leaning onto the discomfort, because we felt discomforted for a long time. Not to say that people in my country are not racist towards Black people, absolutely they are, but I think it's not a competition on who's more racist than the other. It's about how can we all do better from where we are at. That's at least what I think. Since I see no other hands raised or anyone else unmuting, I suppose maybe we can let our speakers take a rest and let you all go too, unless if anyone has anything to say. But
Priyanka?
Yeah.
Can I just thank you for excellently moderating a really heavy session? Excellently. You are a breath of fresh air. So thank you. Thank you
God,
so much.
I don't feel that. I just had a mini heart attack with all the breakout room and all of that. But then thank you anyways for saying that. Thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to be in a space where we can share together and feel in a safe space where people really get it without having to really explain some of the basics. So thanks to everyone who's just stayed on and come into this event. Yeah, hopefully we will upload it and we will share the link. So just share it with everyone. And thanks for those complimentary words. I'll try to soak that in too.
And if I could second Lillian's compliments of you, Priyanka, because it's the hardest job, moderating, and then all the breakout rooms and all that kind of managing it all in the background. So thanks. And I think even just setting the tone at the beginning as well. And I think it was a lovely event, and a very open and honest event as well. So thank you, Priyanka, for that.
Thanks so much again. Well, on that note, having received the final thanks, I guess now I will close so that nobody else can be thanked anymore. But please follow us. We're going to take a break, but follow us, consider joining us. We're a group that, discusses issues on in academia in Ireland and broadly. And so hopefully we'll see more of you and even participate actively in some of our events. That would be fabulous. Yeah. Thanks so much again, everyone, and keep fighting the good fight. And hopefully, please stand up for Palestine too. Take care. Bye.